Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Anti-Doping Podcast, brought to you by the Partnership for Clean Competition. I'm your host, Dr. Marie McNeely, and today we are joined by our guest, Rien. So Rien works for the Anti-Doping Authority Netherlands, or the Dutch Doping Authority, as manager of the Anti-Doping Knowledge Center. He's joining us today to talk more about the Dutch Doping Authority and the unique resources they have developed for disseminating information related to anti-doping. So, Rien, welcome to our show. How are you?
Thank you, Marie. Good to be in your podcast. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Well, we are excited to have you here with us today, and we're excited to learn from you. So can you start off by telling us more about the Dutch Doping Authority and its mission, Rien?
Well, we are proud to be the world's first independent national anti-doping organization, established in 1989 as the Netherlands Center of Doping Affairs. And currently we are renamed Doping Autoriteit, Doping Authority Netherlands, as independent organizations since 2019 and affiliated to the Netherlands Ministry of Health, Welfare and Sports.
Very cool. And what is the mission of the organization?
Well, prime task for the Doping Autoriteit is obviously doping control and testing of athletes in the registered testing pool and enforcement of the anti-doping rules and regulations regarding established anti-doping rule violations. Secondly, is our task to provide sufficient anti-doping education to athletes in order to prevent substance abuse, health risk, and prevent anti-doping rule violations.
Very cool. And I know this Anti-Doping Knowledge Center that we hinted at in our introduction was developed by the Dutch Doping Authority. So, Rien, can you talk a little bit more about your role and how it fits within the broader organization?
I don't have a sports background like many people within the anti-doping organizations. Yet I introduced within the Doping Authority my expertise regarding information management and making information user-friendly available to the users of the Anti-Doping Knowledge Center. As an information specialist, I seek to find as much as possible relevant anti-doping information for the database doping.nl. After assessment of the content of the information, I process this information into the Anti-Doping Knowledge Center. In each record in the Anti-Doping Knowledge Center, I apply keywords as metadata, which can be used in advanced search to filter information.
Very interesting. And this is a really unique position that I think many people might not even be aware existed. So, Rien, can you talk about your career path and what led you to this role?
Originally, I started in 1988 as an ordinary librarian and evolved through the years with the information technology to an information specialist. Now, age 56, I worked for many years in the environmental protection sector at DCMR Rijnmond Environmental Service in the Netherlands. And after a period of in-between jobs, I started in 2013 to manage the anti-doping knowledge centers at the Doping Authority.
So what attracted you to this role in an anti-doping authority?
I must say sports is interesting, but anti-doping in sports is fascinating. So I've never a boring moment when I process information.
Definitely. So I guess let's dive into the details here. What is the Anti-Doping Knowledge Center then, and what resources does it offer people who visit?
The Anti-Doping Knowledge Center started in 2012, so we exist already for 10 years, and we already reached 7,500 records and counting to 10,000 records. We created this database in support of the international anti-doping community. Available in our database are anti-doping case law, scientific literature, rules, regulations, historic prohibited lists since 1968, and the reports and other relevant anti-doping documents.
Very cool. It seems like there's a diverse set of information available within this resource. So can you maybe take a step back and tell us a little bit more about why it was originally developed and what need it fulfilled?
Well, in our opinion, within the anti-doping community, we think there is a lot of relevant information available. Yet it is unknown and internationally scattered and only available within these many anti-doping organizations. That can be national anti-doping organizations or international federations, the IOC or WADA, etc. The database started initially with a 2-year budget in 2013, provided by our Dutch ministry. And of course, thanks to INADO, the Organization of National Anti-Doping Organizations. Now the Knowledge Center is an enduring part within the Doping Authority.
This is a big project. Rien, how did you start building this database? There's so much information out there, and like you said, it's so scattered. How did it start?
Well, it primarily developed in support of the anti-doping community. It was first started by our colleagues at the Doping Authority. They invoked more expertise like me in 2013. And the database is free accessible for anyone interested and or involved in sport and anti-doping. That can be athletes, students, journalists, legists, etc.
So, Rien, can you talk more about how this knowledge center handles issues related to copyright for some of the documents it contains? You mentioned there's a lot of different kinds of documents, and I'm sure there's a lot of different rules related to copyright.
Most of the information is already disclosed on the websites of national anti-doping organizations or other anti-doping organizations, or they are provided voluntarily by these organizations to our database. We always mention the source of the content in the records. More an issue is, I think, privacy of the athletes. In some countries, there is legislation for privacy regarding athletes. And if necessary, we reject anti-doping decisions. And regarding case law, our policy is that an anti-doping decision is relevant for the community. Less relevant is the identity of the athlete.
Oh, that makes sense. And I know, as we've mentioned now a number of times, the database has a lot of information, a lot of content, but you have specialized and your team has worked really hard to make this content accessible and easy to navigate, which I think is so important to getting people to actually use it. So, Rien, can you talk about some of the different filters and functions within this database that help people find just that piece of information that they're looking for?
Well, we have advanced search options. So you not only can mention some text in a search bar, but visitors of the database can select keywords in the different sections in order to filter information and to obtain limited proportional search results. When you use the function any and all buttons within a section, this will improve the search results even more. A lot of keywords are related to issues stipulated to the WADA code and reviewed in scientific literature.
Very interesting. And I guess taking a step back here, Rien, when you think about these databases, what are some of the benefits that having this information available can have on CleanSport as a whole?
Obviously, the purpose is to find quickly relevant information in our database instead of searching on the internet and wasting time.
Definitely. And I can imagine you've spent a lot of time yourself uploading all these and categorizing them, adding those keywords, things like that. So you've had a chance to look at a lot of these really fascinating documents related to anti-doping. So for you, Rien, what are the most interesting documents included in the Knowledge Center?
Well, after reading, I think in the database, very valuable is the collection of anti-doping case law we have available. You read the content and you read the circumstances, and it remains very fascinating.
Definitely. So have you read all of the documents in the Knowledge Center yourself?
Well, it's very necessary for the in-depth making available the documents in the database to apply keywords and to make advanced search possible in each record.
Definitely. And it sounds like quite a bit of work to maintain. As you can probably imagine, listeners, new information is coming in every day in the world of anti-doping. So, Rien, for you, how do you maintain this database over time?
Well, the anti-doping knowledge center is not like the bridge of the Starship Enterprise, like in movies. Mm-hmm. There is just an office desk in an office room. There's a personal computer and a connection with a content management system at the servers. And that's it, folks.
I'm sure it's a lot more exciting when you're there in person and working on it. But I love that you painted this realistic picture of it, because we do anticipate when you don't get to see all this black box technology of what's happening there, you envision something that's a lot more complicated. And it sounds like you're adding new content regularly. So what is that schedule like, Rien, in terms of adding new information?
Well, daily I add new content to the database in the records with application of the keywords and abstracts after in-depth assessment of the content. So I just read case law, I read through scientific literature. And through the years, the database has been improved. New keywords and more advanced search options were introduced. And there's a complete difference between the database starting in 2012 and the database when you visit it today.
For you, I guess, do you have to make decisions about whether something meets the criteria to be included, or is everything pretty much that you received included in the database?
Well, I make decisions about selection, full text, anti-doping case law. I will process. But unfortunately, like in the US, most of the anti-doping rule violations are settled through an accepted sanction. And the only thing to see about it is a press release. So press releases and accepted sanctions are unfortunately not relevant. Full text scientific literature, full text anti-doping case law is very relevant to us. And if necessary, we redact anti-doping case law to remove the identity of the sportsman.
Gotcha. That makes sense. And I imagine by reading all of this information over the years, you've learned quite a bit. So what are some of the most interesting things that you've learned over the course of working on this database, Rien?
Well, Marie, most fascinating is the attitude of the Russian athletes. They are very involved in doping scheme. And this results in a lot of cases of Russian sanctions for anti-doping rule violations committed in the past. And after retesting and in anti-doping investigations, they are sanctioned thereafter.
Certainly. I think there have been so many fascinating cases over the years, and it's wonderful that you've had a chance to look through them. So thinking about where you're at right now and where you would like to go with this Anti-Doping Knowledge Center, Rien, what are the goals going forward to the future?
The great wish is to improve the case law, not only from the English-speaking community, but, for example, also from South America and Asia. So I very much like to expand the Knowledge Center to continue to collect more and more anti-doping case law, scientific literature, and other relevant anti-doping documents.
Definitely. And Rien, you brought up a good point. I think most of our listeners out there are English speakers themselves, but this Anti-Doping Knowledge Center does have filters for language, for country, things like that. So even if you don't necessarily speak English as your first language, it sounds like there are resources that would be of interest there. Is that correct?
That's correct. And I must say, Google Translate is very patient. So recently I visited the website of the Icelandic National Olympic Committee, and I don't speak a word Icelandic, but with assistance of Google Translate, I can read their documents. So there is a lot of case law available, also in foreign languages. But my experience is with Google Translate, you can read these documents very well.
Oh, wonderful. That's definitely a good resource, a good tip for our listeners out there. And we've talked about some of the issues that you run into regarding building this knowledge database. And I know there's just a lot of problems in anti-doping that we're continuing to work to solve every day. So, Rien, if you had all of the resources imaginable, is there one problem in the field of anti-doping that you would want to solve most?
Obviously, the Anti-Doping Knowledge Center is not so familiar under the members of the anti-doping organizations and their officials and employees. And secondly, obtaining anti-doping case law and other documents is very hard. I noticed that many national anti-doping organizations and other anti-doping organizations have case law and anti-doping cases available. However, this information is unavailable outside their organization, despite the requests we made to make this available for the Anti-Doping Knowledge Center.
Gotcha. It sounds like this is an ongoing challenge. Do you have ideas for how this could be solved?
It's hard. I know that in the Scandinavian countries, there is privacy legislation and a barrier. We indicated that we can redact anti-doping case law, etc., but it's hard to persuade them to make this information available anyhow.
Oh, definitely. Well, we wish you all the best as you continue to build this valuable resource. And if our listeners want to learn more about it or check it out, what is the best way to do so?
Well, you can visit doping.nl and you can email me and you are free to make inquiries. I want to make an appeal to all listeners of the podcast and to members of the anti-doping community to make available your case law you have available and to provide us other relevant documents to us. In advance, I'd like to thank you for submitting your information.
Oh, fantastic. Well, listeners, definitely reach out to Rien, send resources if you have some available related to anti-doping case law and some of these scientific literature pieces that we mentioned today. And Rien, it's been a pleasure to chat with you. Thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Thank you, Marie.
Well, thank you again, Rien. Thank you, listeners, for joining us today. It's been a pleasure to have you here. And if you haven't had a chance yet, we would truly appreciate it if you could leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform to share your experience with our show. And listeners, please note that the Anti-Doping Podcast features a wide variety of clean sport experts, and episodes may include statements and or viewpoints that do not necessarily reflect the views or values of the PCC. Thank you, and we look forward to seeing you on the next episode of the Anti-Doping Podcast.